I spent the last day or so going really far down the rabbit hole trying to solve a bug related to Vue Jest, Vue Test Utils Next, and Vue Class Component. This really shows off the sheer complexity and craziness of the modern JavaScript ecosystem, and I'm going to show you how I figured out what this bug was and how I fixed it. So basically the bug is this person has reported that Vue Test Utils Next is not working correctly with the Vue CLI. Apparently it doesn't work out of the box at all if you're using Vue Class Component. I started off by verifying this, so I created a completely new project using the Vue CLI. I didn't do anything special, but I did choose to use Vue Class Component. I then ran yarn test unit to run the tests, and you would expect this to work out of the box, but surprisingly it doesn't. This is mainly due to Vue 3 being such a new library and the ecosystem has not caught up yet, but nonetheless this certainly should work out of the box, and clearly it doesn't. We're getting this error here, props message was not found during render. Let's have a look at the component and see what's going on. So the component looks something like this. It's a really simple component, it just has a lot of markup and it renders this message up here. If we head down to the actual component implementation, it's a very simple component. It's a class component here and it uses this options decorator. And this doesn't work. So the problem is this message has not been found on the template. Let's go ahead and see if we can figure out how this works. So my first instinct was to have a look in Vue Test Utils. This is a test only bug, so I assumed it might be related to Vue Test Utils. Over here on the left, we have the Vue Test Utils codebase, and I tried to reproduce the issue. I made a number of test cases for class component. You can see I have one here, it's a very simple class. We then mount it and find a span. We do something similar with the props here. I decorate it with the props decorator, and we expect that to be rendered in the markup. And this is passing as well. I'm going to go ahead and run these tests and show you what happens. So I'm just going to do yarn jest. We're going to not even need to watch. I am going to run with no cache to make sure I get the latest tests. And we're going to run this class component test I just wrote. And we're going to see one of these fails spectacularly. So I've written a number of tests here. Most of them are going to pass, but the last one is not. It's going to fail and we're going to get a huge output with a very large error. The computer is running very slowly right now. There we go. Let's scroll up and have a look. So clearly this test is failing and we're getting a very similar error. I'm going to close this message because my Mac is about to overheat, but I'm going to try and finish this video anyway. So you can see here, the context.changed message is not a function. This is not really what I was expecting, but we are getting a very similar error here. And if we scroll up, we're getting all kinds of warnings and we're getting another warning here about some message not being available on the template. If we keep on scrolling up, we can see all the other tests are working. And I actually have a console log here. What I'm doing is logging whatever I'm passing into the mount function. So up here, or for example, this foo component, and so on and so forth. You can see they have some similarities here. If we start from the top and go down, the first one is a plain old object with a function render. That's this one here. It's not a class component, but everything is working correctly. The next one is this foo class, and we can see that's here. And we have no decorators or anything, so it's just a plain old function. The next one is this data props, and this is a little bit more interesting. We are using this decorator here, and if we scroll over here, we can see it's appending this VCC base class. I'm not too sure what this is, or I wasn't too sure what this is, but everything still appears to be passing. If we continue scrolling down, we can see the one that's failing is the very last test, and that one is using a single file component, as opposed to declaring a class inline like this. So if I scroll up to the top, we'll see our class component is in fact an SFC using the Vue file extension, and this is the one exhibiting the bug. This gave me a good hint. It turns out the error only occurs when you're using a single file component, as opposed to declaring the class inline in regular old Typescript. So what this means is the error is not in Vue Test Utils, it is somewhere else in the toolchain. My next instinct was to have a look at Vue Jest, which is the thing that takes a Vue file and turns it into regular JavaScript. Let's have a look at that code base now. I tried to reproduce it here, I commented out all the other tests, and we just have the one class component test here. And if we scroll down, I'm doing this very simple test by mounting it and expecting it to work. Let's go ahead and run this and see what happens. I'm just going to run yarn jest, and we're going to run this on the test.js file. And we're going to see we get the exact same error in this code base. It turns out the props are not correctly applied. Hopefully this test is going to run at some point. My computer is about to overheat. That's why it's running so slowly. I'll just give it a moment. Several years later. Okay, there we go. So we're getting the exact same error. Message is accessed during render, but it is not defined. So it looks like the error is probably somewhere in this code base. This code base is quite complex and I was having trouble tracking this down. So what I decided to do was create a minimal reproduction. And that's over here in this code base. I created a new, very simple code base, and what this one is going to do is use the minimal code to take a Vue component and turn it into regular JavaScript. Let's have a look at that one. Script to be able to translate from Typescript to JavaScript. Let's have a quick look at our Vue file that we're compiling here, and this is it. There we go. For example, the divs and spans, and compile them into render functions. The next thing we need to do is take the script tag and we compile that by TypeScript because it's written in TypeScript, and we'd like to compile it to regular JavaScript. I then console log both of these to show you what's going on. And finally, we go ahead and merge those together into a single JavaScript file by concatenating the template code, and we're putting in the output text from the TypeScript compilation, and then we're merging them together here. I'm going to go ahead and run this to show you what happens by running yarn tsnode index.ts. And what this is going to do is take that Vue file and compile it into a single JavaScript file. We're going to take a look at the output here and see what's going on. This is going to take a while. As you saw, everything was running very slowly, so let's just be patient and let it run. Okay, so we have two blocks that we've output here. The first one is going to be this template tag. We've taken this template here and compiled it, and what that's given us is this kind of crazy render function here. It's imported a bunch of optimizations from Vue, create vnode and create block, all that kind of thing, and it's turned it into this. We can see the message is here, which is a string, and some other things are happening as well. The script tag is even more unreadable. What it's done is taken the TypeScript and compiled it using the Typescript compiler, and we end up with this unreadable mess. You can see the extends keyword for the class is actually a function that does all kinds of crazy magic. We also have this decorator function here, which is doing whatever it does, and so on and so forth. If we continue scrolling down, you can see the original code here. And once we have these two, we add them together into a single JavaScript file. What I've done is that I'm going to show you that one now. And here is the output, this giant mess. This is in fact a Vue single file component. It's obviously completely unreadable, but you can see it's there. And you can see kind of what it started off as. We have our class component here. If you have a look around for long enough, you're probably going to find the rest of the code that we wrote as well. Now that we have that, we can actually go ahead and write a test. And that is exactly what I did. I have this spec file here, which I'm going to show you. And all we're doing is creating an app using Vue. We're importing that JavaScript file, and then we're mounting it manually. So I create a div, I give it an ID, I put it in the body, I then create app and mount it on there by passing this message prop here. And then we go ahead and mount it and console log the HTML. So let's see what happens here. I'm going to run yarn jest and pass in main.spec.js. And we would expect this to exactly the same error here. The props are not found correctly. So we're getting closer to diagnosing the issue. We have a minimal reproduction and we have something to work off. Let's go up and see the error. It is here. And this is giving us another hint. I see this VCC base property here, and this contains the props. And I have no real way of going forward here with any kind of logical approach. I just messed around until I figured it out. But it turns out what we need to do is grab these properties from inside of here and then attach them to this default export. And that's going to make everything work. I kind of reasoned this out by looking over here in my other code base. We see we have these objects here, which usually contain single properties. And what we should be doing is actually merging this VCC base into our object. That sounds a little bit crazy, but I'm going to show you how it works and show you how I got this one to work and how I'm going to fix this bug. Let's head back to our terminal here and update our code. What I can do is head into hello.js and do this manually first just to test it out. What I'm going to do is jump in here and actually extract out the VCC base values, and that's going to merge them into this object, and hopefully everything's going to work now. Just going to save this one off, head back to my test and run it. And if everything works here, we'll know we've solved the issue. And the next thing we have to do is go ahead and implement this inside of Vue Jest to make sure everything is working correctly. This is going to pass, of course, because I planned this out and have tried everything out. And if we just wait a moment, we are going to see this is passing and the error has now gone. We now have this nice object here and we are rendering hello world correctly. So we found the bug. Of course, we can't just hard code this here. We're going to have to find a better way to fix it. And what I'm going to do is update this compilation here. I'm actually going to put it inside. So I'm going to come down here and make this VCC base, and this is going to get everything to pass. So now I'm able to successfully compile a Vue component into JavaScript with decorators and class component, and everything is working correctly. This is definitely a good place to be, but what I really need to do is take this improvement and implement it in Vue Jest so everyone can enjoy it with the Vue CLI. I've actually already done that, and I'm going to show you how I did that. Let's head back over to our Vue Jest code base. I'm going to head to the part where we generate the code, which is the generate code file. And all I had to do here was, instead of merging them, like I'm doing with this, uncomment this, and I'm going to use this VCC base property here, and this is going to get everything to pass. Just to prove this, I'm going to go ahead and run that again with yarn jest and run test.js. This is a good solution, but it's not perfect. The one problem I'm having here is there's no clear way to know after something has compiled that it started off as a Vue class component. Because of so much compilation happens, it's very difficult to tell what the original code actually was. One technique is probably to use the source map and see what's going on. Unfortunately, this is still failing. I think the problem is I didn't run this with the no cache flag, so it's actually using the old processor instead of the new one. Let's go ahead and try that one out again. Anyway, I need to figure out now how to detect if something was a class component and then temporarily or conditionally apply this logic here with the VCC base property. If it's not a class component, we don't need this, so I'm just going to ignore that one. So that's the next step I'm going to do. Once I've solved that, we can see that it is now passing. We are not getting the warning anymore, and hello world is rendered. So we have successfully diagnosed, solved, and fixed the problem. And the last step is the easiest one, writing the code and making a pull request. So keep an eye out for this pull request. The lesson here is just how complex this modern JavaScript ecosystem is. There's really no way to fix this bug unless you have a very good idea of what is going on under the hood. I don't think you should need to know these details, but it certainly does help to know these things when you're debugging, and we can see it came in really useful here when I was trying to debug this issue. The main thing I needed to do was isolate the problem. We started off with the Vue CLI, which means the problem could be anywhere, but we eventually narrowed it down to a single code base, and in fact, we actually narrowed it down to a single script of about 30 lines, so it was very easy to identify the problem. I'm going to leave this one here, but if you do enjoy this kind of impromptu bug fix videos, please let me know and I'll continue to make them.